Morning, or well, I don't know what time it is where you are, but it's still morning here in Dayton, Ohio. And
Good morning.
yeah, so I'm Amelia,
I'm Tom.
and this is Monday with Jesus. And today's story comes from Matthew 23. Yay, we've moved on to the next chapter.
Right.
Yeah, so I guess Jesus is still, what is he in the temple?
Yes.
Jerusalem in the temple, and then he's having various conversations with various religious leaders, I guess, and
Yeah.
disciples. And so that's the context for the story Tom's going to tell us.
Okay. Well, this is the story. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. Therefore, do whatever they teach you and follow it, but do not do what they do, because they do not follow their own teachings. They tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear, and will not themselves lift a finger to move them. They do all their deeds to be seen by others, and they wear their phylacteries broad and their fringes long. They love to have the best seats and the places of honor at banquets and the best seats in the synagogue, and to be greeted with respect in the marketplace, and to be called rabbi. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all students. Nor shall you call anyone on earth Father, for you have one Father, the one in heaven. Nor are you to be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Messiah." So the greatest among you will be your servant. For those who humble themselves will be exalted, and those who exalt themselves will be humbled. That's the story.
Okay, well, I have a line here. They persecuted the prophets who were before you. Are we including
We're not doing that one.
Yeah, well, that doesn't make
It's
any
not
sense.
even in I don't know where that came from.
Oh, okay. All right, maybe that's, yeah, whatever. That doesn't make sense as the ending of that discourse anyway.
Right.
Yeah. So Jesus is talking to the disciples here.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
And to the crowds.
And to the crowds, right. About
Very important that it's to the crowds. So, Jesus is a Jew talking to Jewish disciples and crowds and things about other Jews. And so the controversies that were present were, controversies within the community of Israel.
Okay, so what was the controversy? What's the conflict here? It does seem like there is one.
Well, the big idea that I think provides the best framework for understanding these conflicts is that they had conflicts over sources of power and authority. So they exercised authority by their rulings on the law and by building up requirements for righteousness. So there was a conflict. Walter Wink called it a conflict between a domination system and a service system. And so Jesus was criticizing the use of religion as a means of domination and of administration of power.
Yeah, and domination makes sort of sense because he starts off talking about I guess he's talking about the scribes and the Pharisees. And I'm looking at our story map from our website. They tie up heavy burdens hard to bear and lay them on the shoulders of others, but they themselves are unwilling to lift a finger to move them. So what are the burdens that the religious authorities are laying on the people, the crowd, I guess, is
Right.
you're saying.
Well, it was the multiplication of the laws that one had to do in order to be righteous. So there were a myriad, there were lots of laws in relation to Sabbath law, in relation to cleanliness laws, food laws. Running a kosher kitchen was a full-time job. So there were laws in relation to sexual immorality, to circumcision, to idolatry, taxes, prayers at dawn and sunset. So there were the multiplication of laws, some 600 laws in that can be, identified in the legal documents of the Old Testament. And the Pharisees would increase the number of laws and make the law even more burdensome. So Jesus' counter to that is, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So he was criticizing the Pharisees for using the law as a way of building up requirements for righteousness.
Yeah, and Jesus sort of simplified things in just one of the stories we had recently. Main law was love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself, right?
Yes.
So.
But that was a law that would frequently be cited if one asked the question, what's the greatest, as the scribe did. But they went far beyond that, the Pharisees, in relation to lots of laws.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean.
A burden.
Yeah, Jesus kind of simplified things. It wouldn't be so hard as having 600 different things you sort of had to keep track of. What would be a consequence of breaking, these laws, these religious laws, these whatever, these too many laws? I can't even say it.
Well, the consequences varied. There were punishments for some laws that were disobeyed. There were social sanctions. One of the possibilities is that you would be ostracized for not following the laws faithfully. So it was a complex system that was administered in part to maintain places of honor. We know about that. I'm a professor. I have a robe, with bright red stole in the front. We regularly did processions of the faculty where we were, given places of honor at commencement, and so we're quite familiar with these kinds of positions of power and the symbols of that. They change, but the basic system remains the same.
And while we're on the topic of robes, things you wear, well, first of all, I have to multiplicity. There it is, multiplicity. All right, multiplicity of laws. That's my learning for the day, to be able to say that. Anyway, oh gosh, here's another one. What were phylacteries and fringes? I kind of know what a fringe is, but I have no idea what a phylactery is.
In the Shema, it says, you shall bind these on your forehead and on your hand. The phylacteries were little boxes, and you'd write on parchment the central laws of the Shema. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart. You'd write that on parchment and put it in one of the boxes, and then you would bind that box on your arm or on your forehead,
Hmm.
as a reminder,
Yeah.
a way of remembering the practices, the love of God on a minute by minute basis. You could always look down and see the law bound on your hand or on your forehead.
Yeah.
And the fringes were mandated in Numbers 15:38 and Deuteronomy 22:12. They were, on the one hand, a way of keeping evil spirits off. They'd get caught in the fringes. They were also a sign of devotion, piety, righteousness.
Yeah. Oh, I'm chuckling at these things, but actually they really make a lot of sense, and have a lot of, I think, they make a lot of spiritual sense. And I was thinking also with regard to the phylacteries, people sometimes have had, wear lockets with something inside it as a reminder, either a picture. Sometimes I think even things written, something's important to them. Certainly Christians often wear crosses as a reminder, and as a symbol of their faith. So yeah, interesting. Thank you. Okay, so moving on, Jesus says to his disciples, "You are not to be called rabbi." And then, and also, you aren't to call anybody father on earth. What was behind those teachings of his to his disciples?
Rabbi, in the first meaning of rabbi was great. So to call somebody a rabbi was to call them great. Lord, master, those were also ways of translating the word rabbi. So Jesus actively campaigned against using titles as a way of exaltation. The only person who called Jesus rabbi was Judas. And so in Matthew 26, 25, and 40 is the only place that rabbi is used by one of the disciples. And it's often translated teacher, but it was only used by Judas. So that's an indication. Yeah.
Because in
it's an
John,
indication of what Matthew thought about the title rabbi.
Yeah.
That became a central title in the formation of what is now called Rabbinic Judaism.
Right.
So in the aftermath of the war and the reorganization of Judaism, the Rabbinic Judaism and the ties to the rabbis became central.
Yeah. Ray, what about this? Call no one your father on earth.
Yeah, well, there was a it's surprising in a way. Jesus' prayer, the Lord's Prayer, is Our Father, who art in heaven. But that is not calling a person a father.
That's an addressing God.
Right.
Image for God.
Right. The father would be a leader, a position of honor, like Mr. is a title that is widely used. But father was an honorific, a way of speaking to and honoring someone as if they were, in effect, godlike figures.
And well, in Roman Catholic Church, priests are addressed as father, aren't they?
Right.
So that was not
surprising.
Yeah, that's
that
not
has
something they
become
picked
the
up on.
customary form of address.
Yeah, it is. That just kind of shows you that not everything Jesus said necessarily gets into the Christian tradition.
Right, but that is one of the sources then of the conflict between Protestants and Catholics. Protestants don't use the term father for the leaders of congregations. Increasingly now, the honorific that is used is pastor.
Pastor, yeah. But there, you do have, excuse me, you do have reverend and the right reverend, and there are titles definitely.
Right.
And a
so
lot
I
of
have the titles. I'm Reverend Doctor.
right.
Thomas E. Boomershine, so
Right.
on. So
Yeah.
I don't use those titles, and I don't ask people to address me as doctor. But those were the issues around father.
Okay, now another thing in this one episode, there's these two things about what you're not supposed to call either yourselves or others, and it's the disciples are also not to be called instructors. And what's the reasoning behind that? What does that mean, and what's the reasoning behind that?
A synonym was teacher. So an instructor would be one who taught and was used to identify the teachers in the various schools.
Okay.
So they had one instructor in Jesus' frame, the Messiah.
What's the Greek word for instructor? I was curious.
I don't know. I'll have to look.
Well, I'll tell you. You should write it down for me. A leading question you couldn't answer. Well, I don't know if I pronounced this right. Cathagatus? Does that sound familiar? Cathagatus is how you say it?
No.
All right, never mind. Let's move on.
All right.
Sorry. Okay, now at the end, actually, I was not at all familiar with this scripture until the very end. The greatest among you will be your servant, and all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted. That's a very important teaching that's maybe not familiar enough to most of us. So you just want to talk about that just a little bit too, please.
Well, I had said at the beginning that one of the steady critiques that Jesus makes is what could be called the domination system. And that was characteristic of the Roman Empire. It's characteristic of hierarchies, that hierarchies become ways of those who are on top of the hierarchy dominate those who are lower. That's an economic expression of domination. The rich control and dominate the poor. Powerful nations dominate weak nations. The people look for ways to have positions of power, of domination. And Jesus regularly taught against the domination system. He taught a system of service, of humility, of not exalting oneself, but rather of humbling oneself, and that would be a way in which in the long term one would be honored, is to be honored for service, for being a servant. So there's a whole school of business leadership, servant leadership that is related to this teaching of Jesus. But it was a way of establishing a system that was not based on domination, but rather based on service.
That would turn the world upside down if people really operated that way, wouldn't it? Countries,
yes.
Communities. Yeah. So that kind of takes us maybe to a question what we generally always ask of these scriptures is, what implications are there for peace and justice in our communities and among families?
Yeah. Well, it's easy to identify. The implication of Jesus' teaching is the ministries of peace and justice now need to be formed on the basis of humility, of service, rather than on the basis of domination and power, of exercising that over people, and using that as a way of building systems of military, economic, and personal power. Many of the problems that we face in terms of social issues are problems of domination. So the domination of men is one of the problems that feminism has steadily been dealing with. That has been true in relation to the dynamics of ethnicity in the United States, of white ethnics dominating
white supremacy. I mean, that's the word themselves is
right.
So related to systems of domination that Jesus is preaching against.
Right.
Oh, he's not preaching; he's teaching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that's especially the case in relation to economic systems. Capitalism is based on the gaining of power by the accumulation of capital.
Mm-hmm.
And so what Jesus is teaching, the implications of this are for a reorganization of the systems of domination and forming them into patterns to systems of service and of humility rather than power and privilege.
Yeah, we're in real time. We're bringing this to you at the end of October, so we're looking towards November elections and soon. It makes me think that one of the criteria we might think about in terms of who we might want to vote for would be who are the persons that seemed to have more of an attitude of humility than and of promoting service in our national, state, local political life, and rather than those who are those who seem to be all about getting power and who are, I don't know, prideful, trying to get honor, are arrogant. That just might be that's a character thing, not a policy thing. We often look at policies, which I think is very important, but we might also want to pay attention to the sort of the character, but also policies reflect sort of service versus getting power as well. So anyway, those are just some rambling thoughts about how the scripture Jesus might relate to our voting decisions.
Right. So when one first looks at this part of Matthew, I was initially, puzzled by, what's this about? Mm-hmm. The more I studied it and thought about it and reflected on what's going on in this, in this story, the more it became clear that Jesus is addressing a major issue, and that is an ongoing discussion in religious communities. That the kind of dynamics that Jesus identified are very present now.
All right, well, we better sign off. Thanks everybody for being with us for this time, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. Bye-bye.
Right. Have a good week.